The war between Ukraine and Russia is entering a completely different phase as the Ukrainian forces crush the Russian army on all fronts with the West's most advanced weapons. The international effects of the civil war in Moscow are growing. Even though the civil war in Russia lasted only one day, its effects and heavy consequences would not last that long. On the streets of Moscow, the Russian army and Prigozhin soldiers clashed for hours, and Prigozhin managed to break through the Moscow route for 200 kilometers. Belarusian President Lukashenko suddenly appeared and the civil war stopped. So what did this mean? The Kremlin backstage was discussing Putin's waning power and trying to heal the wounds of the civil war. This was undoubtedly an advantage for the Ukrainian army, and the Ukrainian forces at the front managed to crush the Russian army in all directions, as however, there were much heavier losses for Russia. With Prigozhin's escape to Belarus and the deportation of thousands of Russian soldiers, the links between the Kremlin and its allies began to be shaken to the root. After the civil war, Alexander Lukashenko, the last dictator in Europe, entered the scene. The Belarusian leader Lukashenko mediated the suppression of the coup attempt. In other words, the coup attempt in which Wagner forces came within 200 kilometers of Moscow was suppressed on Saturday evening with a mediation of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. We can say that the big winner of the Kremlin-Wagner conflict was Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Alexander Lukashenko emerged as a key player. The Kremlin said that Lukashenko offered to step in and negotiate peace as he had known Prigozhin for a long time, at least 20 years. Was Yevgeny Prigozhin's civil war in Russia and his betrayal of Putin, a partner in Belarusian leader Lukashenko? In a statement from the Kremlin, it was stated that Prigozhin will go into exile in Belarus and that charges against Wagner members will be dropped. According to the agreement, the rebellious Wagner soldiers will return to fight for Russia and Ukraine, while Prigozhin will go into exile in Belarus. On the other hand, one claim resulted in some confusion. Now only one question comes to mind: did Lukashenko betray Putin? What's going on between the three most dangerous men in Europe? The head of the Wagner mercenary Russian army, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is now on record as the man who challenged Russian President Vladimir Putin. Lukashenko's press service, and later the Kremlin spokesman, Peskov, stated that the Belarusian dictator had almost resolved the entire conflict. So in this case, is Lukashenko a rebel or a pacifist? Added to the problems that emerged with the war was the fact that Putin as an individual has not ruled Russia for a long time. So much so that Prigozhin and Lukashenko are among the most aware of the real situation in Russia. We can even say that this uprising took place because they knew that the real Putin was crazy and didn't control anything. This breakthrough was generally directed at those who held the strings because of the pressure that the war should end. Because we cannot declare war on Ukraine and the whole world. Lukashenko knew what Prigozhin was going to do because they are linked to years of dirty work in Africa and elsewhere. In addition, Prigozhin's campaign showed that a significant part of the armed people in Russia, especially those fighting in Ukraine, wanted this war to end and were no longer trusted. Prigozhin, on the other hand, understands that those who betrayed him during the uprising and those who came from the Kremlin where he rebelled will not forgive him. It's clear that they will also try to clear Prigozhin and Lukashenko. The Kremlin won't forgive the fear and humiliation they've experienced. As a matter of fact, Lukashenko betrayed not only Prigozhin, but also Putin. The deal puts three of Europe's most dangerous men in a dangerous pact with each other. Putin, who promised to destroy Prigozhin just hours before allowing him to leave the country, now lives with his unpredictable enemy just across the border, and it will fall entirely on Lukashenko, who is in Putin's favor, to take it under control. Through this rebellion, the dictatorial leader of Belarus, a trusted ally of Vladimir Putin, saw a chance to rebrand himself as a statesman. Neighboring Belarus, firmly in Moscow's orbit, was an unlikely figure to emerge with a PR triumph in the wake of Prigozhin's rebellion. We can say that Lukashenko gained credit for brokering an agreement between Putin and Prigozhin, now an international pariah. Lukashenko seeks to use his PR victory to polish his reputation as a trusted statesman, mediator, and above all, a staunch ally of Mr. Putin. It remains unclear what promises were made on behalf of the Kremlin, Wagner, and Lukashenko. But Lukashenko's state-controlled media quickly went into high gear to portray his efforts to defuse the conflict as proof of statesmanship. We can say that the winner of the day was Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Ultimately, Putin lost because he showed how weak his system was and how easily he could be challenged. Prigozhin defied, attacked, was very brave, and then retreated like a loser. Only Lukashenko scored points. The first eyes, in Putin's eyes, as a mediator or negotiator in the eyes of the international community, and as a possible guarantor of the deal. So why did Putin let Prigozhin go? Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov announced that Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the short-lived insurgency against Russia's military leadership, would be allowed to retire to Belarus in exchange for stopping the march for justice in Moscow. The deal was for a higher purpose, which Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko allegedly mediated. It was explained as preventing bloodshed, avoiding internal conflicts, and avoiding conflicts with unpredictable results. This sounds very noble, but just hours ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a televised speech describing Prigozhin's rebellion as treason and one that struck the very heart of the Russian state. He seemed to be preparing the Russian people for a civil war. So we can say that the fact that Prigozhin got away with it could be for a higher goal. His once ally and warlord Yevgeny Prigozhin led a stunning 24-hour uprising that posed the greatest threat to the Russian dictator's power in 2 decades. This, in turn, made the military coup attempt in Russia much more damaging to the Kremlin regime than the loss of occupied territories in Ukraine and years of failure in the Russian Federation's economy. Let's not forget that Russia's GDP is 1/25 of the GDP of NATO countries. It's clear that Russia's defeat in the war could turn into a greater disaster than the collapse of the USSR. Prigozhin's idea to stop the new war became very popular among the people. We saw that an armed uprising was supported in Rostov. People were seeing off these Wagnerians with tears in their eyes because they were very close to this idea and all this bad to be stopped as soon as possible. In this direction, many people in Russia realized that the country was experiencing an economic disaster, a military defeat, a collapse of power, and most importantly, that the Tsar was a fake. So how did Vladimir Putin get to this point with his #1 friend, Prigozhin? Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Russian mercenary group Wagner, launched an armed uprising last Friday night after months of complaints about the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Russian military. He put the world on notice by saying that all the reasons Russia gave for its attacks on Ukraine were lies. With so many corpses behind him, he stood before the camera and cursed the Russian Minister of Defense. He even said, referring to the Russian President Putin, that if a simple KGB officer sits in that seat, I will sit too. In short, Wagner's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, ignited the civil war in Russia, probably with the support of some of the powers he had behind him. On June 24th, when the leader of the Wagner PMC, Yevgeny Prigozhin, announced the beginning of the restoration of justice in Russia, Wagner troops took Rostov-on-Don and marched in the Rostov, Vonage, and Lipetsk regions of the Russian Federation. Wagner troops with armed vehicles entered the Moscow region, approaching the capital of the Russian Federation, about 200 kilometers away, after which Prigozhin announced that he had ordered his troops to retreat. On the other hand, he wonders what consequences his initiative will have for the war in Ukraine. It seems that the idea of sane people in the West who believe that Ukraine should get the weapons it needs as soon as possible will prevail. It turned out that it was not Ukraine that was provoking something, but that this madness in Russia must end as soon as possible. The revolt revealed that the Russian people did not need this war, and Prigozhin's idea of ending the war became popular at all levels of society, from the oligarchs to the sane military. Naturally, Ukraine should have long-range artillery and missiles at a certain range. This will help end the war faster and establish real peace, which, as it turned out, is beneficial even for the Russians. The war between Russia and Ukraine is deeply affecting world politics. A very important power struggle is taking place in the Black Sea, which is bordered by many countries. Russia is about to suffer its biggest defeat in this war by losing its dominance in the Black Sea. But what makes the Black Sea so important? Why Russia wants to dominate the Black Sea? To answer this question, we need a map of Russia with an area of more than 17 kilometers squared. Russia is the largest country in the world. The north and east of Russia are completely covered by the ocean. However, Russia cannot use these ports for sea trade because Russia has a very cold climate and some parts of the oceans freeze in winter. Russia needs to access to the seas in order to use its ports. Two seas can be used for this. One is the Baltic Sea and the other is the Black Sea. First, let's look at the Baltic Sea. These are the countries bordering the Baltic Sea: Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Germany, Poland, Russia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Only 3 of these countries are not NATO members: Russia, Sweden, and Finland. However, Sweden and Finland have started the process to become NATO members. These 2 countries are expected to join NATO very soon. In this case, the Baltic Sea will become NATO's inner sea. It is unlikely that Russia will be able to conduct military activities through this port. In this case, the only sea Russia can use is the Black Sea. But here, too, the situation is not good for Russia. One of the main reasons why Russia invaded Ukraine was to strengthen its dominance in the Black Sea. So what does the Black Sea have to do with this war? This question is overlooked by many experts, but in fact, it is one of the main reasons for the war. Located in the northernmost part of the world, Russia has used the Black Sea to connect with the south. The Black Sea is very close to Russia's industrial cities. Also, the Black Sea's hinterland is quite large. Russian ships need to use the Black Sea to reach the Mediterranean countries, Africa and Middle East and India. Russian ships also need to pass through the Black Sea to reach Iran and Syria, with which Russia cooperates. But Russia faces a very important obstacle to see this. Let's look a little further back on the Black Sea map. The only way out of the Black Sea is through the straits controlled by Turkey. To get from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, you need to cross the Bosphorus and then the Dardanelles. In the past, these straits were under the control of the Ottoman Empire. Russia attacked the Ottoman Empire many times to capture the straits. Finally, in the First World War, a great battle took place in the Dardanelles. However, the Ottoman army managed to win this war by showing a historical resistance. Russia's plan was once again foiled. Russia is in constant conflict with Turkey over the use of the straits. Turkey, a NATO member, is making a great effort to prevent Russia's aggressive policies. Russia is facing a very serious crisis in this regard. Russian warships have been trying to reach the Black Sea through the straits for months. Russia put great pressure on the Turkish government to allow the ships to pass. However, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said that these ships would never be allowed to pass. The Russian Defense Ministry then confirmed in an official statement that the Varyag and Admiral tribute ships followed a long route through the South China Sea and reached Vladivostok on Russia's Pacific coast. Turkey has won a major diplomatic success over Russia. Turkey's move prevented the Russian Navy from attacking Ukraine. Russia's continental shelf in the Black Sea is quite narrow. Therefore, it is unable to put pressure on Turkey regarding the passage through the Black Sea. Russia wants to solve this problem by increasing its dominance in the Black Sea. However, there is another reason for Russia's effort for dominance in the Black Sea. The Black Sea is known to have oil and natural gas resources. Last year, Turkey found natural gas under the sea. As a result of drilling in the Black Sea, Russia is trying to dominate a wider area in order to utilize the natural resources in the Black Sea. Crimea is one of the strategic importance for this very reason. Crimea, annexed by Russia in 2014, is like an island in the Black Sea. This region, which has a very wide coastline and natural harbors, is the most critical point in the Black Sea. The state that controls Crimea also expands its continental shelf in the Black Sea. This is very important for the exploitation of the natural resources under the Black Sea. Ukrainian leader Zelensky is determined to end the Russian occupation of Crimea. This war started with Crimea and will end in Crimea. Zelensky said Zelensky's plans to liberate Crimea have won the appreciation of the whole world. The land links between Russia and Crimea were completely severed. First, the Ukrainian army won a major victory and managed to liberate Kherson. Then the Kerch Bridge, the main highway connecting Russia and Crimea, was blown up. Thanks to this, Russian influence in Crimea began to diminish. Attacks on the Russian Navy are increasing every day. A large part of the Russian Navy has withdrawn from Crimea. Ukrainian military operations against the Russian Navy in Crimea continue. The Russian-appointed governor of Crimea said that the Russian fleet shot down a Ukrainian drone over the Black Sea. However, Russia has not shared any information about the losses suffered by the Russian fleet in this area. According to data shared by Ukrainian military, a total of 16 warships have been sunk in the Russian Navy since the beginning of the war. Due to these operations, the Russian military has lost millions of dollars. The Russian Navy continues to lose control of the Black Sea. If the Ukrainian army succeeds in liberating Crimea, Russia will lose all its power in the Black Sea. This is a nightmare for Russia. The Ukrainian army is preparing to give Russia another nightmare. The new operations of the Ukrainian army in Crimea will change the whole balance in the Black Sea. If Ukraine succeeds in extracting natural gas in the Black Sea, Russia will have no more leverage. Russia's economy is mostly based on the sale of natural gas and oil. Russia constantly threatens European countries in this regard. European countries are forced to trade with Russia to meet their energy needs. However, if the Ukrainian army succeeds in liberating Crimea, it could start exploiting the natural resources in the Black Sea with natural gas from the Black Sea. European countries would no longer be dependent on Russia. This would lead to the complete destruction of Russia's greatest power. If the Ukrainian army wins this war, it could bankrupt Russia completely. Russia has lost billions of dollars because of this war and has faced many rebellions. Ukraine has thwarted all Putin's plans. Russia, which claims to be the most powerful state in the world, is being driven to extinction after Zelensky's clever plans. Russia is going through the most difficult days in its history. What do you think about the great rivalry in the Black Sea? Do you think the Ukrainian army will succeed in liberating Crimea? How do you think the liberation of Crimea will affect world politics? What are your predictions for the future of Crimea? First of all, Ukrainians finally received long-range missiles today. UK Defense Secretary confirmed that they decided to supply Ukraine with the Storm Shadow cruise missile that has a range of over 250 kilometers. By contrast, the US supplied HIMARS missiles only have a range of around 80 kilometers. On top of that, these missiles are also low observable, so the Russian air defense will be facing even more challenges from now on. Simultaneously, Polish officials confirmed that they supplied Ukraine with 14 fighter jets MiG-29. This came in very handy because the British cruise missiles are actually air-launched. The distance between the Crimean Bridge and the closest Ukrainian position is 246 kilometers. So Ukrainians still do not have a huge buffer zone when it comes to target number 1. It looks like Ukrainians will have to rely on ballistic missile HIM-2 if they want to reach the Crimean Bridge for sure, while the British cruise missiles are more suitable for targeting Russian supply lines and sending a huge shock to the rear because all the biggest ammunition depots, warehouses with equipment, and command centers are approximately 90 kilometers away from the front, which means that they are now within reach of Ukrainian Air Force. When it comes to the Bakhmut direction, Russian flank started to fall apart. If previously Russian troops were abandoning their positions on the southern flank, then today, the trend reached the Russians on the northern flank. Yesterday I told you that after Ukrainians penetrated Russian defense near the canal and forced Russians to abandon their positions south of Ivanovsky, Ukrainians put Russian troops in the forest in operational encirclement and would likely try to finish them next. And this is exactly what happened today. It was reported that Ukrainians opened 2 lines of attack from the northern part of the forest and from Ivanovskaya. The engagements were light because Ukrainians understood that Russians were cut off from supplies. As a result, closer to the second half of the day, Russians started running low on ammunition and with no prospect of improvement of the situation. Several detachments of the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade abandoned multiple positions in this region after seeing that their fellow men abandoned their positions. Soldiers from the same 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade left a huge trench network north of Klisivac. This is the biggest and most fortified position south of Bakhmut. Prigozhin reported that he had to send his men from Bakhmut to plug this hole in the flank to the Ukrainians. Also launched a huge counterattack on the northern flank. In a similar fashion, Ukrainians started undermining the Russian defense from the corner between Bodanivka and the Small River. After initial success, the scale of the attack was increased and Ukrainians opened 2 vectors of attack directed towards each other. As a result, the Russian 9th Motorized Rifle Brigade started abandoning their positions, which resulted in even bigger first-day penetration than to the south. Right now, Ukrainians are heavily shelling Russian troops in Borovika and Yadin. It looks like Russians are moving in the direction of Berezivka from the south and may very soon attack in the same direction from the north. This will put Russian forces in the Lysyansky and Trepovo-Vasilyevka in the operational encirclement in the same way it put Russians in the forest in the operational encirclement. Such a tactic allows Ukrainians not only to generate tactical gains at a much lower cost, but also allows to capture a lot of unused equipment. As Russians were preparing to face a huge frontal attack from Mankivka, these forces accumulated a lot of heavy equipment, such as RPGs, anti-tank mines, and a plethora of machine guns, mortars, and other equipment which they cannot take in an event of a rapid retreat. So Ukrainians can seize a lot of trophies not only to the south of Bakhmut, but also to the north.